the short-term bond fund that I use has a maturity of about 2 years. So it's a slightly different animal in terms of risk and return. Okay, that's number 10. Number 11, if my 401k doesn't have a small cap value fund, could I use a small cap blend as a substitute for the two funds for life strategy?
And the answer is yes. And to use a cooking analogy, it's weaker sauce. So you might use more of it. I would look at it carefully, and hopefully it's a small cap blend fund that avoids the growth part of the market, because the small cap value has the highest historical returns, but small cap growth is a dog. So you really want to have a fund that filters on some kind of financial metric like profitability to try and avoid those overly hyped, too expensive small caps. But if you get a good small cap blend fund that does kind of tilt at least in that direction of better financial performance and maybe even nudge in the direction of value, you might use more of it to compensate for it not being a small cap value fund.
And historically, when we look at all the 40-year periods, large cap value has almost the same return as small cap blend.
So that's another alternative, yeah. And again, it's weaker sauce, but use a little more.
So okay, I'm going to push to number 12 here. Then, because this is all you here. How does Portfolio Visualizer work on target date funds?
Well, it back tests them fine. You can use it to figure out, to kind of use the look inside using the factor regression. The problem is that with target date funds, if it's in the years where they're shifting their allocation, so not the 2060, 2065 funds, their allocation is very stable. But if it's, say, a 2030 fund where it's ramping down the equities and ramping up the bonds, well, when you run a back test on it, you're going to see that glide path in action. And when you run a factor regression on it to look inside the fund, that's what I recommended in my paper to try and figure out what you're getting. You're going to get a mix of things. Some of it's going to be the last year's allocation. Some of it's going to be 5 years before. So you just got to be careful in understanding what you get out of using Portfolio Visualizer on it. You can still do it, but pros and cons. It's a little harder. Yeah.
13, I'm pushing here.
Yeah. Keep pushing.
13 says one of your charts showed a 33 times real return, but an 81% drawdown risk. And then he goes on to say that means $100,000 could turn into 33.3 million and then decline back down to 627,000. Does that seem right by multiplying the different scenarios?
And the answer is yes, but that's extremely rare and perhaps even impossibly unlikely, because what you're doing is you're saying, I got the average CAGR, so that means I'm at a point where the market valuation is probably in the middle. It's not a peak. And then I get the worst decline, which usually happens from a peak. So I would say that that's an overly conservative analysis. If you've gotten the average return, you're probably not going to see the absolute worst case decline at that point in time. So yes, he did the math right. No, that I would say that that's an extremely over conservative view of it. But if you're invested in a portfolio that has a downside risk of 50%, 60%, 80%, whatever it is, and you're approaching retirement, I think in your mind, that is what's on your mind, right? I've invested in a way that I'm exposed to losing half my money. What if my nest egg becomes half as large? Can I still afford to retire? And, you do have to think that way, because as long as you bear the risk is there. And as long as you're trying to earn the return that bearing the risk provides, that risk is there.
Got it. Thank you. Number 14, what is the investment factor? You said dividends are not a factor, but what is this factor that you talk so much about?
So I should say, first of all, there are many different market models that are equally valid for characterizing the market. I just chose to use one of the Fama French 5-factor models that included this term investment factor. It's also called CMA, or conservative minus aggressive. And it's the difference between the returns on a diversified portfolio of stocks of low and high investment firms. So a high investment firm would be aggressive, a low investment firm would be conservative. And so that's what it is. There's a momentum factor I could have used. Or a model that includes momentum. There's an investment factor that was in here as well. I don't really care so much which of these models I use, because I've found that when I've done the analysis with multiple models, the same funds bubble to the top. The thing I like about the Fama French models is that they have the longest history. And so that lets me go the farthest back in time. Yeah, but that's what it means.
And so the market itself is a factor, right?
Yes.
And it's the biggest factor.
Yes.
So what is going to drive the long-term return most for young people? In about an hour, I'm going to be talking to 60 nurses who are graduating from Texas A&M. And so they're looking at facing these huge decisions. But the factor of, well, first, of course, they're saving versus spending. But when we decide to invest, there's stocks and there's bonds. And that market factor is going to be the key factor in terms of what they will receive over the long term, right?
Yeah, and that's a really good point, because when I do my analysis, the market, the size, and the value are the things that drive most of the return. And then either the investment factor and the profitability factor, or the momentum factor, and I think profitability is in that one as well, or quality. Those factors are like tiebreakers. It's great if I can get a fund that has consistent exposure to 5 factors instead of 4 at low expense ratio. That's better. But really what we're looking for, because they're widely available and cost effective, is that market factor, the size, and the value. Those 3 things drive 90+% of the return. And the other things are just, an extra 3 to 5% here and there. Yeah.
Okay. And number 15, what if you were to differentiate by market sectors instead of Fama French factors?
Well, the academics would tell you that market sectors like technology or oil and gas or energy they're idiosyncratic risks, and they're not systematic things that we can say, well, for the next 100 years, oil and gas is going to be the winner. It probably won't be. Or for the next 100 years, technology as we define it today will be the winner. So in a sense, you're taking on a risk you're not getting compensated for. And the most extreme example of that would be investing in a single company, having an entire portfolio of one company. You're either going to be a hero, average, or a zero, right? And you don't know. You don't know the outcome, and you don't get any compensation for that. You just take on that whole risk. And so industry sectors are not as extreme as a whole company, but there's still idiosyncratic risk you're not getting compensated for. And what the academic would say is that you can diversify that risk away, and you'd be better off focusing on the things they do identify as factors and having a portfolio that includes them, like small or like value. And what you'll see over time is that value will occasionally include technology, financials, in energy, oil and gas. There'll be all kinds of sectors that go in and out of value, but that it's owning the value part that is giving you the best return per unit of risk. So that's why it's just idiosyncratic risk, and not a risk worth taking. Yeah.
I think you hit that one out of the park. I love that answer. That's great. I mean, I think that'll help a lot of the people who follow your work. I've been nervous about asking you this very last question of the day. I actually have.
Oh, I know the answer to this
I
one.
have butterflies. It says here, Chris. By the way, a lot of people, when they wrote these questions, they started Chris because you gave the presentation, and I'm just hanging on here to your success. Chris, would you consider creating a factor regression video course so a do-it-yourself investor could learn how to judge funds for themselves? What are you thinking?
Probably not.
Okay, no, that's,
and the reason, there's a reason. The reason is I feel like I've already taught somebody who is going to be able to take advantage of this information and do it themselves everything they need to know. It's very simple. The presentation I just did explains the math, and it's super simple. You take, it's this number times that number plus this number times that number, add them across minus that number, and that gives you an indicator of future return. That's it. And you can go to the portfolio visualizer and download all of the data and build a spreadsheet, and that's all you need to do, really. To do a course, or to go deeper would be a course. You'd have to go into statistics and teach people about, how to know what statistical significance was. And the people who are asking this question, I don't think have the stomach for it. I don't think they have the stomach for the course. So I think most people who have the inclination and math skills to do this kind of analysis got what they needed out of my presentation. They'd be able to look at it and go, oh, that's pretty simple. Oh, here's the Excel table. I can do this. And they'd be off and running. And the people who can't do that would need so much more information that I think they'd get off the train. I think they'd be partway into the course and they'd go, oh my gosh, this is just way more complicated than I thought it was. And they'd step off the train. So that's
I don't have to hear your answer because I was afraid you were going to say yes. Where is he going to find the time for that? Hey, what about, would they get anything more out of Larry's book?
I think they would. I think people who are in that in between would potentially get something out of Larry's book because he does a very nice job of going through and explaining in lay terms how these factors have been identified, why some are factors and why they're not, why we should believe in them persisting in the future, which I think is really important. I think, again, the book we're talking about is your complete guide to factor-based investing. Larry Swedroe and Andrew L. Birkin, really good book. And you can tell. You see the post-its?
Yeah, that's good.
It's dog-eared and thumbnailed, and it's.
I like that. We will have a link to that book. And by the way, when people buy that book at Amazon and they go to Amazon through our link, I think we get $1 for the foundation. So your dollars are appreciated. So. Chris, congratulations on the presentation. Thank you for taking this time. I don't want to call this bad news, but Chris is going to be off doing other things for a few weeks, and we got a whole bunch more questions to do here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to record several more of these, but I'm going to leave all of them that I know that they really want to hear from you until you get back, and then we'll do this again. Okay?
Well, as always, Paul, it's a great pleasure. It's super fun. And I got to thank the audience you were able to drum up for generating what I thought was a really rich and fun set of questions. That I love the question and answer part because it's where we get to learn and learn from our students and interact with our students and figure out where they are and try to meet them there. So hopefully this is useful to people. And I also loved this presentation doing it because I got to put some of my heart and soul in it. I got to put some of the pictures from our recent travel in there. And I love doing photography. So maybe that's a tease for people who haven't seen it. You get to see some beautiful Iceland.
All right. Well, it's been wonderful, Chris. Thanks, and we'll see you in a few weeks. What, 3 weeks?
Yep, gone for about 3 weeks.
All right. Keep safe.
You too.
I am so embarrassed.
No. Don't be embarrassed.
All right.
Just be grateful. You learned something new. That's a good day, right?
Oh my.
That was Paul Merriman with Sound Investing. Sound Investing, soundinvesting.com, and paulmerriman.com are produced and exclusively owned by Paul Merriman, who is solely responsible for their content. For more information, free articles, mutual fund recommendations, and more, visit paulmerriman.com.